We have here Wendy Temple and Sam Oppedisano, two of my former beloved students who I treasure. So happy to have you guys here. So do you want to start, Wendy, telling us about what it is you're doing? And yeah.
So I'm Wendy. I graduated in 2010 from Ossining, and so right now I am in a master's program at Hunter, and I am working as a teacher assistant at St. Joseph's School for the Deaf, as well as I am currently their substitute art teacher. Because ours retired due to COVID. So I'm working on that. And I'm also a part-time religious educator at the Larchmont Temple. So I'm a jack of all trades right now, but hoping to eventually be a teacher of the deaf, and hopefully even later down the line, start a children's theater program for deaf students. So that's me.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sampson. I graduated in 2011, so a year after Wendy. Wendy and I are actually neighbors in Ossining, so we've known each other for a very long time. I am currently working at a nonprofit organization called the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. I'm a program and communications assistant there. So effectively what I do a lot of administrative back-end work, but what our organization does is we host a lot of off-the-record meeting between former government officials from all over the world, scholars. We do a lot of meetings between representatives from the United States, China, Japan, South Korea, all over. And the overarching goal of the organization is to promote world peace, diplomacy. When governments can't maybe speak to each other publicly, we try and do some back channeling to make sure that communications are still going. So, with our previous presidential administration, my job was definitely very interesting. Donald Trump definitely made my job interesting. I'll just leave it at that. But, I have a job, fortunately, these days. And so I actually started this job right 5 days before New York City shut down for COVID. So I have been largely virtual this entire time. So it's been a very interesting experience. But yeah, I'm looking forward to just answering whatever questions your students might have. And, I definitely want to be able to give them time to ask whatever they feel comfortable asking.
Okay, so Sam, why don't you talk to us a little bit about kind of how you ended up sort of in this profession, and, where you went after high school, and sort of how you made it into this job.
Yeah, so after graduating OHS, I went to SUNY New Paltz, which is only about an hour and 15 minutes north of Ossining. It was a great school. I double majored in international affairs and East Asian studies. And doing that, I kind of went into college already having an idea of like what I might want to do. I wanted to do something with international politics. I was always very interested in East Asian culture. So I figured why not try and find something that utilizes the two of them. So when I was in college, I studied abroad in Japan for a semester, which was really great and a really defining experience and kind of solidifying what I was interested in doing. And then, I did a couple of internships with nonprofit organizations at the United Nations in New York City. So that was, again, just kind of leading me down that path. But it's funny because I think one thing, especially these days, that it's important to realize is once you graduate college, I think there has been a historic belief that like you go to college, you get your degree, like you get your degree in something very specific, and like that is kind of what you are dead set on doing. And that's not always the case. And it's also not always the case that you get a job in your field immediately after. And I think that's something that's very important to know, because it took me 5 years after graduating college of trying to get a job in my field. And that's largely in part because my field in particular, it's more like having connections to getting in rather than just like applying. But I very gratefully got this job just by applying. But during those 5 years, before I got this job, I worked for New York State Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff, whose office is right across the street from OHS. And then I worked at a university in New York City in their international affairs master's program. And, I just tried to look for any opportunities I could to make connections. So even if it meant that it wasn't something part of my job, I would still find time to like go to events at the United Nations or local embassies, like anything to just make connections. I was a freelance foreign policy writer for several years. So, all these things kind of added up into being able to get me this opportunity, which, like I said, I got this job 5 days before New York City shut down for COVID. So I'm still lucky to have a job, even especially at a nonprofit when like you're literally called a nonprofit, you don't make a profit. Very fortunate. But yeah, it's kind of funny the journey that life after high school takes you on. And then when you kind of look back on how you got to where you are, it's funny how things kind of add up.
It is. That is often how it goes, what you just said, that idea that you go to college and you imagine that you're going to know what you're going to do, you're going to stick with your major, you're going to get a job right out of college. And a lot of times you change majors, a lot of times you don't get a job right away. A lot of times the path you take is completely different from what you originally, kind of had intended. So it's very, very true. Wendy, how about you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your path, how you got here?
So I've always known that I've wanted to do some kind of education and some kind of working with kids kind of situation. I went to Kean University, Kean, in New Jersey. And originally I was theater education. I was a big drama nerd at OHS, as a lot of teachers will attest to. But when I got there and I started doing all the education classes, I wasn't actually diagnosed with my learning disabilities until I got to college. So I have ADHD and I have immense anxiety. So I thought this is how everybody went through school and how everybody felt. And I didn't know until I got to college. So my college experience was a little like off. But I made it through. End of the world. If I did anything at a different timeline than anybody else, it was the end of the world and life was going to come to an end as we knew it. But I think the best thing I did for myself was giving myself that extra semester. So I graduated from Kean with a bachelor's of the arts in theater. I took a few years off, did some work in some preschools and stuff like that. And then I ended up starting my program at Hunter, which is a dual certification program in deaf and hard of hearing K through 12 and general education 1 through 6. So it's been definitely a journey. And I never thought when I was in high school that I would do something that wasn't theater, but I found a passion in American Sign Language because it is such a theatrical language. And my first ever sign language class was at OHS in my senior year, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. So currently I am a TA, but that's not the end all be all. Hopefully when I graduate with my degree, I'll be able to broaden my horizons and actually teach. But it's been an eye-opening experience of realizing how blessed I was in the Ossining schools, and I took it for granted a lot of the time. And looking at my students who sometimes come in and they don't have a pencil or they don't have a supportive family at home that even knows how to communicate with them. A lot of their parents don't know sign language. So to see how lucky I was to just even go home and say like, hey, I had a great day at school. Oh, let's talk about it. There have been a lot of eye-opening things working at a school for the deaf. And yeah, I can't wait to see what the next few steps brings me to.
That's awesome. When are you set to finish your degree?
So again, this is another set of, there is no correct timeline. Technically a master's is supposed to be 2 years, but I'm paying out of pocket, which is not an easy thing to do. So I won't be done until May of 23. So it'll take me a little bit, but we're almost there. And you know what? That's what's important. You make it to your end goal, but there's no real timeline. And I really have to admit, like, again, I thought it was the end of the world. And anybody who's like nervous about maybe I won't do well, or maybe I only, yes, I can, Mr. Jaffis. So I thought it was just, I was a loser because I couldn't do it in time. But Mr. Jaffis wants me to talk a little bit about college debt and stuff like that. So
before you do, I think what you're saying is so important. Like, and I think everybody out there, and I think I'm sure I spoke with both of your classes about the path I took. If you guys remember, do you remember what I went to school for originally?
Was it accounting, or am I making that up?
Nope, I'm making it up.
Gets the gold star.
I went to school to be an accountant. I hated where I went, which actually, by the way, guys, I shouldn't say I hated. I went to Binghamton for my first 2 years, and it's an amazing school, but it wasn't right for me. It was too big for me. But I went through my first 2 years there and realized I did not want to be an accountant. I wanted to be an English teacher, which is completely different from what you would think, right? And it took me an extra year, to finish my undergrad, but I wouldn't, looking back at it, that was the path. I don't think I would have ended up here had I not done that. And I felt the same way. I remember that idea that I'm not going to finish in 4 years, and what's that going to say about me? And you're going to college to figure it out. And a lot of times you don't figure it out till you get there. And that's a really important thing to consider. You want to make a good decision, and hopefully you go to a school and you end up in a major where the major that's right. But a lot of times it's not in that timeline. So I just wanted to reiterate.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that's really important is that if you are at a school and you thought that this school was like your dream school, everything is perfect about it, and then you get there, you go through a semester there and you're like, wow, I hate this place. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in transferring. There's no shame in going to a community college first. There's no shame in not wanting to go to college at all and wanting to pick up a trade. There is nothing wrong with any of these things. And it doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean that you need to be fixed. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you're on a different path. And as long as that path leads you to what you are passionate about, that's what's important. 100%.
I think it's also important to, I don't think this was specifically mentioned, but like, I think there's a very large societal norm or belief that like, when you are a senior in high school, your next step immediately has to be college. And it's like, you might want to go to college, but like, maybe you don't want to go immediately after high school, and that's okay. Take a gap year. A lot of people do that. Like, I feel like, I will say Ossining High School doesn't fall into this realm as much, but I would say high school and the United States educational system does not necessarily do the best job at preparing people to really explore the things that they might be interested in throughout the 12 years of their education. I think OHS has a lot of opportunities for people to do that, like Wendy said, students of OHS are very fortunate to have that other students across the country aren't. But by no means should you feel any pressure to like have to go to college immediately after because like your friends are going, or you have this kind of like arbitrary timeline that doesn't really like mean anything. It's kind of like, I'm sure Wendy can attest to this, but like, for people our age, we're getting to that point where it's like you're almost turning 30 and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to have my life together by 30. And it's like, I still get anxiety making a doctor's appointment on the phone.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like you're still learning to like be an adult, So I just think that's an important point to make.
And even to add on to that, I'm still learning how to be a kid from some of my students. So that like to not forget about that part of my life, that it's okay to be an adult and be a teacher and all of that fun stuff. But you have to remember that it's okay to be a kid sometimes. It's okay to, if you need to step back for a second and say, you know what, I need to do something for me. Self-care is ridiculously important. But yeah, just to go back to Mr. Jaffis's question really quick. So I was lucky enough that I went to a Jersey State school. I didn't live in New Jersey, so I didn't get Jersey State prices, but it's the equivalent to a SUNY in New Jersey. And I don't have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, but I'm very lucky that I have been able to pay it off at the rate that I've been able to. It's not easy given my salary, but I don't want to adjust it because I don't want to have to be paying for it for the rest of my life. Right now in my given trajectory, I think I have 6 years left on my student loans. And that's paying over $300 a month towards them, which is horrible. But at the end of the day, yes, it's important to take out these loans, and it's important to do what you're passionate about and all of these things, but it can be very overwhelming. And thinking about, like, how am I going to pay this back? What if I don't get a job and all of that? I still sometimes think about what happens if, like, my school is a very small school. We only have 60 kids in it. So I think, what happens if the school closes? How will I pay my student loans? I think about that a lot, but actually my parents encouraged me not to take out another loan for my master's. They encouraged me to pay out of pocket, just so that I wouldn't have to keep on piling and piling and piling and piling and piling, which is both a wonderful thing and a terrible thing. But yeah, honestly, you try your best with student loans, and getting into college debt is it's the newest fad, in case you were wondering. No, but honestly, it's nothing to be ashamed of. A lot of people go through it. Just make sure you're being responsible. Like, right now, I have like, a lot of people have loan forgiveness right now, and they don't have to pay towards it. But even though I don't have to, I am paying towards it, because then I don't have to worry about interest, and I can just have it all go straight to the big sum, which is awesome.
I can also talk to that a little bit. So I'm not in a master's program like Wendy. I just have my bachelor's degree at the moment. I went to SUNY. So just to give people some context, SUNY stands for State University of New York. It's, if you are a New York State resident, you can go to a SUNY or a CUNY school, which CUNY is also City of New York. And you basically get, like, a better pricing for your education. It's still, I mean, it's cheaper, but I put cheap in quotes because what is cheap these days? Like Wendy said, nobody has hundreds of thousands of dollars just lying around. But so for my 4 years, I graduated college like almost 6 years ago now, and I still owe like $47,000. So, like, do I have $47,000 floating around? No. And similar to Wendy's situation, I work for a nonprofit, and nonprofits were very largely hit when this pandemic struck because, again, by the name alone, nonprofit, you don't usually have, like, unless you're the Carnegie Foundation, you're sitting on like $1 billion endowment. Most nonprofits don't have a lot of money. So, I'm fortunate that I do have a job. And before, the past presidential administration and this current administration kind of put that pause on federal student loans, I was paying $600 a month on top of paying rent in New York City. I mean, it's not easy. And so I think this kind of goes back to the point of, college is definitely an important investment if you feel that college is something that is right for you, and you should really, like, think about that. I had a great experience in college. It was wonderful. I'm in a position where I'm able to pay back my loans at a rate that is not, breaking the bank. But it's something that you really have to, it's a decision you really have to think about. And that's kind of why I always suggest to people, if you're really not sure what you want to do, it's better for you to wait an extra year after graduating to really give it some thought, because I have always thought it would be really frustrating to, like, go to college and realize you're spending all this money, and then halfway through realize, like, this is completely not what you want to do. I mean, it's different to, like, kind of go and, like, change your mind and, like, already be at a school that can facilitate that change. But there are a lot of people that go to college and they realize when they're there, like, holy hell, this is not what I want to do. And it's like, well, you're already 20 grand in the hole. Like, you're going to have to pay it back. There's no refunds. Yeah. So I just think that's very important for students to keep in mind these days.
Ms. Hanrahan, can I just interject and just to add to their incredible points? I wrote up on top that it was a windy path for you, right, Sam? But a windy path can be the best path, right?
Absolutely.
You don't know where it leads you, and you try everything, and you have done such amazing things, gone all around the world and talked at the UN and all this amazing stuff. And your life at your age, you've done so much, right? So if you haven't found exactly what your passion is, that's okay. Well, no, not your passion, but your I don't even know what the right word is, but you've done so much and so much to be proud of that I hope you realize that a windy path can be a good path. That's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
In a not so linear way,
Yeah, and I think that's usually how it unfolds for a lot of people. You kind of go in with one idea and then it changes halfway through, and then just kind of with the landscape of the world when you start college and when you graduate college are usually very different places. I would especially say over the last couple of years, whether it's the politics of the world, the economics, what have you, just your general interests. But like the person you go into as college is very different than the person when you come out of college. And you kind of hope that's the case. You hope that you do some growing during college while you're spending all this money. You hope you at least find a part of yourself or something, have your eat, pray, love moment when you study abroad in Spain or something like that,
This is true. And I think what Mr. Jaffa said is so true. A lot of times it is a windy path, and you want to go in with as much focus and direction as you can, but a lot of times it just takes a different turn, and that's okay. And I think you also said something important too, Sam, like we all, we want all of our students to be successful in everything they do and to be happy. And you said, if you don't know if college is right for you, or if you're not ready, take a gap year, work, figure it out. And sometimes people do take a different path. Sometimes college might not be right, or might not be right at that moment. And that's okay too. We all have different sort of feelings, I think, and directions, especially when we're leaving high school. Exactly. Still haven't figured life out. Still learning and living, right? It's so true. But I think, very, very valid points. I wanted to ask you both too, just to speak to maybe a little bit what it's been like, since the pandemic. Like Sam, you've spoken about it a bit, but Wendy too, as an ASL, TA, as an educator, how has working in sort of a virtual forum been? How have you adjusted to that?
So you guys are very, very, very lucky to be in Google Meets because at least Google Meets has a closed caption option. A lot of accessibility is missing from a lot of these kind of things. Let's say I'm in a 4th grade class and the kid's looking down and working on something, looking. If Sam were to say, Wendy, I would look up, but you don't have that, and you don't have something that flashes. So it takes a lot longer to get certain things done because I can't just tap on the desk or hit the floor or do whatever I would usually do to get their attention, which is frustrating. But because our students are already a little bit behind because of their language deprivation, which is a really big topic, hot topic right now in deaf education, basically meaning they weren't exposed to their native language, American Sign Language, or any kind of language at a young age. So they're behind in their reading scores and their math scores, their everything scores. So that's been very, very challenging because already they were behind and now they're even more behind because of one thing or another. And a lot of our students, I work in the South Bronx, so a lot of our students don't have some of the necessities that they may or may not need. So, and we're not a Department of Education school. We are what's called a 4201. And that means that it's for a specific disability. So whether it be blindness, deafness, deaf and blindness, all of those things. And yes, Mr. Yonkel, I did take sign language my senior year. And I do have advice. I know it's hard right now to go out and go places. However, take in as much, go online, look up Doug Ridloff, look up his poetry, look up all of these incredible actors and actresses that are in theater and poetry, and really try and test your limits when it comes to going online and trying to watch a video that's signed and not using the closed captions. Use your extra time to practice your finger spelling. I mean, I'm still not the best finger speller in the world, but if I look around and I'm bored one day, or I'm sitting and I'm waiting for a train or whatever I'm doing, I look at a sign and I start finger spelling, because it never hurts to have the extra practice in that. Try your best. I know it's so hard right now because we really can't go to events, but try and make connections with people in the deaf community. Because if you show that you're interested and you are wanting to learn, a lot of the time, most of the time, I don't want to speak for everybody, but most of the time, every time I've talked to somebody and been like, I'm not completely fluent, but I do my thing. I never want to say that I'm fluent because in languages, they're constantly evolving and constantly changing. So, and there are new signs, like we just got new signs for our president. So like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, like, so there are a lot of things still to learn. And I recommend, if you want to practice when you're not in class, lifeprint.com is great. Going on YouTube, looking up Bill Vicars, he's great. Just really trying to broaden your mind. Open your mind. So I use, honestly, so in mainstream society, I don't use my ASL as much, but I have noticed that there's a lot of controversy. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of controversy about hearing people learning, and there's a lot of controversy about, well, who should be teaching it, who should be learning it. And I think as long as you're making an attempt to communicate with the community, it's such a strong, rich, vibrant culture. And a lot of people will look at it and say, oh, well, you know, that person's deaf, that they're just deaf. No, it's more than that. There's cultural stuff, there's linguistic stuff that is very deaf. Like, if I was going to say really, and like somebody looked at me and said, oh yeah, really, and I would say true biz, like really, that happened. But in English, we never say something like true business. That doesn't make sense. There are lots of little things that you will learn from interacting with the community. And I've learned a lot since coming here. I thought I was a really great signer, and then meeting my deaf coworkers and signing with them has made me grow so much. I'm not an interpreter, and I'm not planning on becoming one, but that's also a big thing, that if you want to become an interpreter, there's a whole nother school for that. If you want to become an ASL teacher, there's a whole nother school for that. So honestly, yeah, with ASL, just keep on practicing. Honestly, it'll come. The grammar structure is hard, but if you stick with it, you'll succeed. It's a great language.
Thanks, Wendy.
No problem. I know that was long-winded.
No, it was great. It's very helpful, and it's awesome that you shared those resources. That's much appreciated. Sam, how about you? How has it been? I mean, you said you started your job, and 5 days later, everything closed, right?
Yeah, it was like Monday was like, welcome, Sampson. And then like Wednesday was like, we don't know where you'll be on next Monday, Sampson. And then Friday was like, go home and don't come back, just work from home. And so I was like, I mean, they were nicer than that. But no, it's in some ways, I think it was a little easier for me because I was starting a new experience, and the new experience was compounded by having to work from home. So like, that's all I've ever known for this job, as opposed to working at a job for like a year, having a set routine, and then having to completely uproot it. That being said, trying to be onboarded for a new job in the middle of a global pandemic, when like nobody really has any infrastructure or protocols in the beginning of how to like communicate remotely on a regular basis, I think communication was the biggest challenge at first, because you know, it's a little different when you're in an office setting, and you have to ask your colleague a question. You either just like turn around and ask them because they're sitting next to you in a cubicle, or you just walk down the hall to their office. You know, here it's like you're texting people, you're emailing people, you're FaceTiming people, you're on Zoom way too much. Like when this pandemic's done, we need to not ever use Zoom again, and we need to go back to like stone tablets and chisels. Like I never want to see another email again. I'm very over it, as I'm sure everybody is. But, you know, I think in my case, it was a little easier because my organization is only about 7 people, and it's very tight knit. So everyone's very understanding. You know, several of my coworkers are parents, they have kids. So it's like, you know, there was a lot of flexibility. And I think that was the biggest theme, was just being flexible. But I would say one of the other challenges is that, so my organization, prior to the pandemic, when we would have these off the record meetings with government officials and scholars and experts, whatnot, we would fly them in from all over the world to New York City to have these off the record meetings. And like, you know, in a global pandemic, you can't even get on a plane to go to Chicago. Like, so how are you going to bring in foreign nationals? So I think from the past year, the frustrating part for me is I've kind of missed out on having those experiences of physically being in these meetings with these like dignitaries and ambassadors and whatnot. But on the plus side, you know, we're able to meet a lot more easier now because we all just hop on Zoom. And so these meetings that we would have once every couple of months, you know, we'd have a couple in a month. And the only other challenging part to that was, since, you know, half of the people we work with are in Asia, I'm staying up until maybe 10 o'clock at night on these calls because of, you know, time differences. And I think we had a call recently with people from like Canada, but they were like the West Coast of Canada, and then like India and the UK. It was like the weirdest mashup of time zones that I was like, I don't even know what day it is. Like, just tell me, just set an alarm and tell me when I need to be on this call. But, you know, all that aside, it's been a good experience, and I think the learning curve has been compounded by the pandemic because everybody that I've worked with has had to kind of relearn how to do what they already do while also teaching me what to do. But so far we've gotten everything down pat. I think just communication, you know, feeling like you're bugging people too much with like emails or text messages. Like anytime I hear a Slack notification, my blood pressure rises. I tried changing the ringtone of it. That doesn't help. It's just anytime I get a notification, I'm like, okay, deep breaths. And, you know, self-care has been very important this time, or this entire year. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I've been fortunate that I haven't been as affected as other people have in their workplace with this pandemic, in that I have a job still, and we're small enough that we were able to think on our feet to kind of restructure everything. And, you know, fortunately, the people I work with have been there long enough that, you know, they instinctually had a plan in place of just like knowing what to do and like how to get their act together in under 2 weeks. So that was really, really great, because when you have a much larger organization, that can be very difficult to do.
Great. Thank you for sharing all of that information, both of you. It's just so interesting hearing what you're doing and how you're adapting to everything that's been going on, and hearing about both of your winding paths, from one winding pather to others. I so very much appreciate that. So from each of you, is there any final like piece of advice you might give to our students, just in terms of, you know, their high school experience, something they should do, something they shouldn't do, just life advice, anything?
Go ahead.
I think I've maybe said this in the past when I've done Alumni Day, but I always just kind of like to, the two things that I'll highlight really quickly. The first is you students of OHS have access to taking SUNY courses. Like, I know Ms. McCrae is on here. Hi, Ms. McCrae. And, you know, you've got SUNY Race, and you've got, you know, all these different SUNY classes. I highly recommend, if you can, taking advantage of those, because even if you don't go to a SUNY college, just taking those college level courses will prepare you for college, but also some colleges might accept them as transfer credits. So I went into college a semester ahead of everybody else. So I could have graduated early and saved money, but I decided I wanted to, you know, study abroad and enjoy my college experience to the fullest extent. So I did that. And then the other piece of advice that I always like to give is that if you do decide to go to college, college is like one of the few times in life that you get a complete fresh start. So for any reason when you graduate high school, you look back at yourself and you're like, there are all these aspects about myself that maybe I want to change moving forward. College is your opportunity to do that, because chances are wherever you go, you are not going to be going to high school or going to college with people you went to high school. I actually purposely chose a college that nobody else applied to, because I was like, I'm done. Like, I need a fresh start. So just keep that in mind. College is a fresh start in a lot of ways for you, and it's one of the few fresh starts that you get in life. So use it to the fullest extent. Be yourself. Be the self that you didn't feel comfortable being in high school. College can be a lot kinder of an experience, I have found, than high school in some ways. So
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Go off of
Wendy?
that. I'm going to try and make it short and sweet because I know we have to go. But
It's okay.
but make good habits now. I thought that my habits weren't going to follow me. We're going to go to college. We're going to be a new person. And sometimes that can happen. However, I know Miss Hanrahan and Miss McCrae, they can tell you I was not the best student. I made a lot of bad choices of like not doing my homework and not studying for tests and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I can do it the night before. That's fine. But when I got to college, that really bit me in the tush because I didn't have those incredible like building blocks that everybody else had. And I was given the opportunity to have the building blocks. But whether I chose to make just something on the ground or whether I chose to build a castle, you know, it was up to me, and I chose to just have the bricks kind of sitting in front of me and didn't choose to build anything. So I think my best advice is that, first of all, it's okay to ask for help. And second of all, just make really good habits, because at the end of the day, your bad habits aren't affecting anybody except for you. So
It's so well said. And as Miss McCrae just said in the chat, all of your brains, when you're in high school, you're still developing, you're young, and we're always developing, and that's okay. We're all on this journey. And you're wonderful. You are both wonderful, my beloved former students. I love you guys. Thank you so much for coming today. It was a true pleasure. And keep in touch, and I look forward to speaking with both of you very soon.